You may have heard of Anna Kendrick's new directorial debut, Woman of the Hour, based on the true story of a serial killer that lurked in the daylight, confidently displaying his face in picture. This is the true story of Rodney Alcala. Welcome back to Curiosity Killed the Cat. I'm your host, Ashlyn. Before we start, I want to give a few disclaimers. This episode contains mentions of death and SA, and information was taken from openly available sources on the internet. On a bright day in 1978, millions of viewers tuned into The Dating Game, a quirky and lighthearted TV show where one lucky bachelorette picked her dream date from 3 mystery men, but no one could have guessed that one of those men, Bachelor Number 1, was hiding a dark and deadly secret. He was Rodney Alcala, a man who had already committed unspeakable crimes and would go on to become one of America's most notorious serial killers. Today, we're diving into the chilling story of Rodney Alcala, better known as the Dating Game Killer. How did a man capable of such horror end up charming his way onto primetime television? Let's set the scene. It's September 13th, 1978. A young woman named Cheryl Bradshaw is the bachelorette on The Dating Game. She's bubbly, confident, and excited to meet her mystery date, Bachelor Number 1, Rodney Alcala. He's introduced as a successful photographer who loves the outdoors and riding motorcycles. But what no one knew was that Alcala was living a double life. At that very moment, he was under investigation for the murder of a young woman and had already served time for the brutal assault of an 8-year-old girl. And yet, here he was, charming the audience in The Bachelorette with his wit. Despite his eerie demeanor, something Cheryl Bradshaw would later describe as creepy, Alcala won the game. But thankfully, Cheryl decided not to go on the date. She later said something about him didn't feel right. That gut instinct might have saved her life. But Rodney Alcala's story didn't begin or end on that stage. Born in 1943 in San Antonio, Texas, Alcala seemed to have a bright future. He was intelligent, charismatic, and even attended UCLA and later NYU, where he studied under Roman Polanski. But beneath the surface was a man with disturbing tendencies. In 1968, Alcala committed his first known attack. He lured 8-year-old Holly Shapiro into his apartment in Hollywood. A passing motorist saw him coaxing her and called the police. When officers arrived, they found Holly barely alive, beaten and essayed. But Alcala escaped and fled to New York, where he started a new life under a false name. In New York, Alcala seemed to reinvent himself. He worked as a counselor at an arts camp for children, a horrifying role given his past. It was during this time that he committed his first known murder. In 1971, Ellen Hoover, a 23-year-old socialite, disappeared. Her remains were found over a year later, and years after that, DNA evidence would link Alcala to her death. Alcala's move between states and his use of fake identities allowed him to evade capture for years, but his pattern was clear. He would lure women and girls, often pretending to be a photographer, then attack and kill them. He carried a camera capturing chilling portraits of his victims, some of whom remained unidentified to this day. By the time Alcala appeared on The Dating Game, he was already a seasoned predator. But his charm, on full display during his TV appearance, was a crucial part of how he lured his victims. One of the most infamous cases was the murder of 12-year-old Raymond Samso in 1979. Robin disappeared on her way to a ballet class in Huntington Beach, California. Her body was discovered 12 days later in a remote canyon. Witnesses reported seeing Robin with a man who matched Alcala's description, leading to his arrest. When investigators searched Alcala's storage locker, they uncovered hundreds of photographs of women and children, some in provocative poses, others appearing unaware that they were being photographed. Many of these individuals were never identified, and to this day, police suspect that Alcala's actual victim count may exceed 100. Alcala's trial was as disturbing as his crimes. Over the decades, he was convicted and sentenced multiple times, as his death penalty convictions were overturned on technicalities. In his 2010 trial, he chose to represent himself, delivering a bizarre defense that included playing a rambling recording of Arlo Guthrie's song Alice's Restaurant. Ultimately, DNA evidence connected him to at least 5 murders in California and 2 in New York. He was sentenced to death in 2010, but justice couldn't bring back the lives he stole. Rodney Alcala died in 2021, but his story is far from over. Hundreds of photographs remain unidentified, haunting families of missing persons. The question remains, how did someone capable of such evil manage to charm his way into homes across America? Perhaps the most chilling part of all, Rodney Alcala didn't look like a monster, but as we've seen, monsters can hide in plain sight. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Curiosity Killed the Cat. If you want to see the photos released by investigators or learn more about the case, visit reliable sources. Stay safe out there. Until next time.